There is a moment in many homes when an elder sits quietly in the corner, watching everything happening around them, and somewhere in the middle of all the movement, the daughter in law gently says, "Please, you just relax." And sometimes that sentence doesn't feel like care. It feels like distance. It feels like being pushed aside. It feels like, am I no longer needed? But let me tell you something very honestly, very gently, very humanly. Most of the time, those words are not a rejection of you. They are a reflection of a changing world inside the same home. Let's understand it together. You know, one of the biggest misunderstandings in family life today is that silence is distance and space is rejection. But in reality, space is often the birthplace of healthy relationships. When a daughter in law enters a new home, she's not just entering a physical house, she's entering an emotional system that already has history, rhythm, and unspoken rules. She is trying to understand where she fits, how she should speak, what she should not touch, and what is already decided without her. Now imagine this: every small action she takes is being noticed, not necessarily criticized loudly, but silently observed. And human beings, my friend, do not thrive under constant observation. Even love becomes heavy when it feels like evaluation. So when she says, "You relax," she may not be saying, "Step aside because I don't need you." She may actually be saying, "Please trust me enough to let me try without supervision." But the elder heart, which has spent decades being the decision maker, hears something else: "I am being removed." And this is where emotional misinterpretation begins. Let me give you a simple analogy. When a parent teaches a child to ride a bicycle, at some point they must release the seat. If they keep holding it forever, the child never learns balance. But when they release it, the child feels fear, and the parent feels fear too. Yet that release is not abandonment, it is trust. Similarly, you relax is sometimes a release of emotional training wheels. Not because your role is over, but because a new role is emerging: observer, supporter, and silent strength. The tragedy is not in the words spoken. The tragedy is in how those words are received. One sentence, two hearts, two meanings, and a distance that was never intended. Let's go a little deeper into the emotional psychology of a daughter in law. She enters a home not as a blank slate, but as a person carrying expectations from both sides: her own upbringing and the new family she has joined. And often, without anyone explicitly saying it, she feels an invisible pressure. Do not make mistakes. Now, mistakes in cooking, in managing routines, in raising children, or even in speaking can feel magnified when there is an elder present who has done this for years. Even if that elder never says a word of criticism, comparison lives in silence. So, what happens? She begins to internalize pressure. And pressure, my friend, does not always express itself as stress. Sometimes it expresses itself as control of space. When she says you relax, she might be trying to reduce that internal pressure by creating breathing room for herself. It is not rebellion, it is emotional survival. Because think about it, nobody performs well when they feel they are constantly being evaluated. Even students freeze in exams when someone stands too close and watches their answers. Not because they don't know, but because anxiety interferes with expression. Similarly, she may know exactly what to do, but doing it while being observed can feel like walking on glass. So you relax becomes a subtle emotional boundary. Let me try. Let me fail if I must. But let me not feel like failure will define me here. And if we listen carefully, this is not disrespect. This is vulnerability in disguise. But because elders often associate involvement with care, stepping back feels like rejection, when in reality, it may be a plea for emotional safety. We must understand the modern emotional landscape of households today. Life is no longer simple compartments of responsibility. Everything overlaps. Work stress enters the home. Home stress enters relationships. Emotional exhaustion becomes a constant background noise. A daughter in law today is often managing multiple identities: professional, partner, mother, caretaker, homemaker, and sometimes emotional mediator of the entire family system. Now imagine carrying all that and still trying to maintain perfection in front of elders. It becomes exhausting. So when she says you relax, it may not be about you at all. It may be about her internal overload. It might mean, I am trying to manage everything. Please don't add more layers of responsibility in this moment. But what is heard is, you are unnecessary. And here is where emotional distortion happens. Because when someone is overwhelmed, their language becomes compressed. They do not explain fully. They do not articulate all emotions. They speak in shortcuts, and those shortcuts often sound harsh, even when the intention is soft. We must remember something very important: exhaustion reduces emotional vocabulary. A calm person explains, a tired person compresses, a drowning person signals. Relax may simply be a signal that says, I am handling it, but I am close to my limit. And in such moments, what is needed is not correction or interpretation, but compassion. Because sometimes people are not pushing you away, they are just trying not to collapse under invisible weight. Now let us step into the emotional core of the matter: fear. Every relationship conflict at its root is not about actions, it is about fear. The elder fears, if I am not involved, will I become irrelevant in my own home? And this fear is not irrational. It comes from a lifetime of being the decision maker, the guide, the problem solver. Suddenly stepping into a quieter role feels like disappearing. On the other side, the daughter in law fears, if I do not establish my way of doing things, will I ever be respected as an individual? So she may overcorrect by asserting space, not out of arrogance, but out of identity protection. Now imagine these two fears sitting in the same room. One is afraid of being replaced, the other is afraid of being overshadowed. And between them sits a simple sentence: you relax. That sentence becomes a battlefield, not because of its meaning, but because of what it triggers. This is the tragedy of human relationships. We rarely respond to what is said, we respond to what is feared. So when elders feel excluded, they interpret space as rejection. And when daughters in law feel observed, they interpret involvement as control. But if both sides could see the fear instead of the behavior, everything would soften, because beneath fear, there is no enemy. There is only insecurity asking to be understood. Love has not changed, but its expression has evolved. Earlier generations expressed love through guidance, correction, involvement, and protection. That was their language of care. If I correct you, I love you. If I guide you, I cared. If I stay involved, I protect. But newer generations often express love differently. I trust you. I don't want to interfere. I want you to feel independent. Neither language is wrong. But when two languages meet without translation, confusion arises. So when she says you relax, she may actually be saying, I trust you enough to let you be. But if trust is not understood as love, it feels like exclusion. And here is a deep truth: control often feels like care to the giver, but restriction to the receiver. And space often feels like freedom to the giver, but abandonment to the receiver. So the real challenge is not love itself, it is translation of love. Families today do not need more love. They need better interpretation of love, because trust is not absence of care. It is a different form of care, quieter, subtler, and less visible. And sometimes the deepest love is not in what we do together, but in what we allow each other to do independently. This is perhaps the most important emotional shift in later life relationships. For many elders, being needed has always been directly connected to being involved. If you are not advising, not deciding, not correcting, you feel you are no longer needed. But modern emotional maturity separates these two. Being needed does not always mean active participation. Sometimes it means emotional anchoring. You may not be cooking every meal, but your presence still gives emotional stability to the home. You may not be deciding every detail, but your blessings still shape decisions indirectly. You may not be speaking often, but when you do, it carries emotional weight that cannot be replaced. The tragedy is that many elders mistake reduced involvement for reduced value. But value does not disappear when activity reduces, it transforms. Think of the sun. It does not need to be loud to be essential. Its presence alone sustains life. Similarly, your emotional presence, your dignity, your calmness, these become the invisible architecture of the home. So when someone says you relax, it may not be reducing your importance. It may be redefining your role from operator to anchor. And anchors are not seen every day, but they prevent the ship from drifting away. If we listen without emotional resistance, you relax is not an ending. It is an invitation into a new kind of relationship dynamic. It is inviting elders into a space where love is less about control and more about presence. It is saying, let me try, let me grow, and stay with me emotionally, not operationally. Because every generation does not want absence of elders. They want evolution of elders. They do not want silence. They want supportive silence. They do not want exclusion. They want trust based inclusion. And when elders accept this invitation, something beautiful happens, tension dissolves, not because roles disappeared, but because roles stop competing. The home becomes less like a hierarchy where someone is above and someone is below, and more like a rhythm where everyone has their place. And maybe that is the highest form of wisdom in family life, not holding on tighter, but holding on lighter, not proving relevance through involvement, but expressing relevance through presence. Because in the end, the deepest relationships are not built on control or withdrawal. They are built on understanding what the other person is really trying to say, even when they don't know how to say it clearly. And sometimes all it takes to transform a home is this realization: behind you, relax, there was never rejection, only a different way of asking for love.